Good morning, DawgNation. I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Poured today by Dr. Pepper. Thrilled that you're here. Great guests. Davin Bellamy before we're done. We have a lot to get into with Davin involving the position he knows best. Mike Griffith also stops by today as well. Interesting stuff coming out of Georgia practice. Some of this coming from Georgia players yesterday. I thought Quintavius Johnson, our first time hearing from him, really insightful when it comes to evaluations of his current teammates and how this Georgia defense plans on being more disruptive this fall. We'll give you that on the program today. I think you're going to really like this. And there are some, I don't even know if you call these rumors. It's just more, look, here's the thing. Having done this for a long time, Georgia fans are always going to be talking about something. You cannot quiet the conversation. The appetite for Georgia football information is always up here. Sometimes the availability is a good bit lower. And in that gap, there's always going to be a lot of action. We have an example of that today as it relates to what some people are wondering might be going on with Gunner Stockton's health. This is one of those sort of we report, you decide type things. We'll give you the information. You can decide what to do with it, including, by the way, eyewitness account from Georgia practice, two of those actually during the show today from just last week. So all of that on the way. We are glad to have you with us for it. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, poured today by Dr. Pepper. And it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Dr. Pepper. College football and Dr. Pepper. It's a pepper thing.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
Around here, we say it every day. We are the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. And the reason why I repeat that every day is for myself as much as anything else. It is a reminder to me that the goal of this show is to be talking about what fans are talking about. You know, we don't live in elite media circles. You know, we're not trying to be that type of thing in an ivory tower somewhere. We're trying to be in it with the fans, and we want the show to reflect the fan conversation. And so it is in that spirit that we do this here today, because if you've been spending some time online the last couple of days, Georgia fans they expressed, and I'm right there with you on this, we express our passion for Georgia football by talking about Georgia football. And no matter what time of year it is, whether it's fall camp, spring practice, the games themselves, deep of the offseason, whatever else, Georgia fans are always going to be talking about something. So the thing that many Georgia fans find themselves talking about right now is what they are curious about. I don't think anybody knows for sure, and there's a very good chance, like a lot of things that we have a tendency to talk about, that all of this is just nothing. Sometimes that's the way it goes. But there is a little bit of curiosity right now about what might be going on with Gunner Stockton. And is Gunner Stockton, in the midst of this spring practice, 100% fully healthy? Now, backdrop for this, and we'll get specifically into what we know about Stockton, is that Georgia is very, very cautious with spring injuries. You know, it's the one thing that Kirby traditionally does, opening press conference to begin spring practice. It's like a list, like if you're old enough to remember the phone book, you remember the phone book? It's like reading the phone book of all the guys who've got nicks and bumps and bruises and who's limited and who's not going, and it's almost always labrums, shoulder surgery recoveries. There's a lot of that. So there's always a lot of very cautious treatment of injuries for guys that almost certainly be fully healthy by fall camp. So you take any, call it an injury, any health news with a grain of salt, because Georgia leans into caution when it comes to this stuff during the spring. But anything related to your quarterback at any point in time is also going to generate a lot of chatter. And there is chatter right now about, is Gunner Stockton fully healthy? Is there perhaps an injury we don't know about? Is there something going on here? So let's walk through the evidence that we have about this. It starts for us on DawgNation Daily, poured by Dr. Pepper, going back to Friday's show. And I thought we had a really good show on Friday because our Jeff Sintel, along with Kaylee Mansell and Cody Chaffins, our DawgNation folks who were on hand, got a chance to watch like 20 minutes of Georgia practice. That's not compared to what sometimes happens, that's not a small amount of practice to be able to observe. And I really thought that Jeff did a really good job of essentially just reciting the information. And I've done this before. It's not super easy when you're just watching this catch-as-catch-can football practice taking place in front of you, noticing things, making note of those and then conveying that to your audience through print or on a show like this, not a super easy thing to do. I thought that Jeff did it really well. And so on Friday, and I hope you enjoyed it, I certainly did, I'm just peppering Jeff with questions, blang, 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 just firing off all these questions, just trying to just get whatever I could because I wasn't there. And so Jeff was, and so I'm just trying to just get from him everything that I can. And so Jeff is just giving us a lot of different stuff. And in the midst of talking, he dropped one little small nugget about Gunner Stockton that, frankly, I didn't necessarily make all that much of at the time, but it seems to be a part of what is a little bit of an ongoing conversation right now. So to set you up for where we need to go today, let's go back to Friday for a moment. Jeff Sintel, in the midst of giving us a lot of news and notes from Georgia practice, also dropping in this little nugget of observation about Gunner Stockton. Here's Jeff.
Kirby had a funny line, which basically, and I'm paraphrasing, he's like, now listen, when we break into Indian position groups, you need to follow your position group. And he's like, if you don't know what your position group is, you're probably at the wrong practice because we need a little bit more than that up at Georgia being able to do that. Gunner looked like he had some sort of a brace going on right there, Brandon.
So you get the point of what this was. So Jeff's like, so this happened, and then Kirby said this, and then this happened. It's the kind of way that if we're all sitting around, the local meet and three, having lunch together or a cup of coffee over breakfast, and people are just sort of shooting from the hip and firing off Georgia football chatter. What Jeff was doing with us on Friday was a little bit like that. It was very casual. We're just, kind of throwing stuff against the wall, and in the midst of saying, I saw this and I heard that, and then this happened, Jeff also says, oh, yeah, and I guess Gunner Stockton had a little bit of Jeff called it a brace. So we have done a lot of research today, and look, you got to understand something. All I do is know how to talk. Like, there is so much action happening behind the scenes on a show like this that makes it possible. And so I got, excuse me, boy, that was not good. Oh my gosh. I've had a little bit, I've had voice issues going back to fall. It's been rough this week. I really don't know if it's pollen related or I don't know what it is, but boy, you just heard it crack right there. So laugh, please, at home at my expense. You have freedom to do that. Anyway, back to the topic at hand. So I really got with I'm going to call them our research staff here this morning to say, people online are saying this about Gunner Stockton, that he might not be fully healthy right now. I said, Jeff made mention of a brace going back to the Friday practice. Can we get together? We had 3 people there, all armed with cameras. That's a lot of photographs. I said, can we get a look at Gunner Stockton from practice, and can we see if we notice anything about that? And lo and behold, things start happening. All of a sudden, it's like a real, I feel like, it's like a real show. So and if you're a radio podcast, I apologize. I'll do my part to describe this, but I think we do have some photos that we can show here of Gunner Stockton. Now, some of this is, you got shadows here, so you don't necessarily see it necessarily. If I could slightly nitpick my colleague Jeff Sintel, who I said, outstanding coverage of, Georgia practice being there on Friday, in the heat of the moment, calling that a brace, and if you're not watching video, you don't see this, might be overstating things just slightly, and that just may have been the word that popped in his mind in the midst of speaking from the hip with us on Friday. But to me, that looks more like a sleeve. Now, not being an orthopedist, what is the difference between a brace and a sleeve? It's interesting that what Gunner's wearing there also looked a little bit similar to what Ryan Montgomery was wearing in a similar photo a little earlier. We know that Montgomery is on his way back from an injury. So you might say not quite brace. Obviously, that's next level up. This more sleeve. Now, I'll also tell you, colleagues that we respect, guys like Jake Rowe and Anthony Dasher have also reported the possibility that maybe Gunner was further limited in a Saturday practice, I guess, that was more on the lines of the full pads, full contact. So there is more substantial stuff going on here than just the, excuse me, good gracious, than just the regular fan chatter. So you've got You've got that going on. So Jeff says, hey, I saw Gunner Stockton had what looked like a brace. I think Jeff probably meant a sleeve. I think he'd probably agree that, yeah, maybe meant to say sleeve. Brace was just the word that popped in at the time. A guy who was also there on Thursday is our Cody Chaffins, taking many of the pictures that we're using here right now. And Cody is actually in our studio today, so I'm actually going to break with normal protocol and bring Cody Chaffins in here live at the moment. So, Cody, here's the scene that a lot of Georgia fans, social media, message boards, things like that, saying, heard this about Gunner, maybe that. Pictures from practice seem to show him wearing, and you would agree with me, this is more, the correct terminology here is probably better stated as sleeve more so than brace, correct?
Yeah, when you look at the silhouette, I think a brace, I think like what the offensive linemen wear, where there's some metal around there. This clearly looks like a compression sleeve. Now, why is he using the compression sleeve? I think the question for me is, does something tight after the first day of practice as a calf tight? Yeah, that's what I think of when I think of those sleeves, not necessarily needing the stability that comes with the brace, but maybe just to get some blood flow or just to keep things from getting tightened up. The fact that he was out there, and those are, that's all the pictures I was taking. What's crazy about being at that practice was I was there taking pictures of Bryson Beaver, you see, the new quarterback who was in there, and then Gunner just kind of happens to be in the picture because when I went out there, you're always looking for the starting quarterback, right?
Sure.
I'm seeing the starting quarterback, but that's a guy who's in his 5th spring practice.
That's exactly right.
I don't need to watch every rep of Gunner Stockton. So a lot of times he's in the background of all these photos that you're seeing, but he's putting weight on it right there. He was throwing, he was in the drill. So the fact that he was there and he was participating, I kind of moved on to see what the freshmen and see what other transfers looked like and all of that. But you can see him there. It is a sleeve for sure.
So let me ask you a couple of questions about this. Is it an accurate statement to say that the sleeve he's wearing is similar to the sleeve that Ryan Montgomery was also wearing?
It looks similar, yeah. And Carson wore that a couple of years ago. I'm thinking at the Orange Bowl and played in the Orange Bowl. So, yeah, it did look very similar. Montgomery last year was in the brace.
That's right.
But this year, yeah, he is in the sleeve. He's been in that sleeve for most of last season.
But it sounds like, based on what you're saying and just your eyewitness account, and I've seen this many times too, there's this sort of play polish type drills that go on in a situation like where the media typically gets to see. What you saw from Gunner Stockton, is it fair to say, is not outside – excuse me, good gracious alive, I swear. Woo boy, it's not outside the realm of what you would have expected to see from him in a situation like this.
No, and here's the thing also. Like a lot of the drills we were seeing, he wasn't running a sprint option. He wasn't running down the line. These are take a snap, 3 steps, and we're firing to work with the wide receiver. So he wasn't doing a ton of that. I did not see him in this drill that Bryson Beaver was doing. Not to say he didn't do it, but I, again, kind of saw him and moved on. But he was out there throwing. Now, I can say this. Coulter Ginn was also throwing, and Coulter Ginn was in a walking boot. So,
okay, yeah.
It was enough that he could be in that drill as well. So that may tell you a little bit more. But Gunner was out there. And he was watching here, but, you can see he takes a couple steps and then throws.
Yeah, so sort of a normal practice participation, at least on Thursday, although the sleeve was present, and then some of the chatter about what might have been away from the watchful eye of fan and media on Saturday leads to some of the fan discussion that's been ongoing. Cody, really good information. Appreciate that. These are awesome pictures, too. Obviously, video not allowed in a situation like this, but really a lot of really valuable pictures that you and Kaylee and Jeff took. So that certainly added to our information about this Georgia football spring practice ongoing. We certainly appreciate that from you.
Happy to help.
All right, so good stuff there from Cody Chaffins, giving us more insight as to what might have gone down with Gunner on spring practice that media saw on Thursday, leading to some speculation about what might have happened after that. And honestly, my assumption in a situation like this is he's probably fine. I tend to veer in that direction when it comes to a spring practice situation. Then you hear about this or so-and-so's limit or whatever else. Almost all of this is out of what we kind of think of as, an abundance of caution, typically speaking. But the reason why this matters, even if we assume that Gunner is completely healthy, is I'm reminded of a lot of the conversations we've had here over the course of the last few weeks, which is when I've talked about my big issues for Georgia in spring practice. Want to see this? Can they do that? Focusing in on what I thought my big questions were. Think about how many guests over the course of that time have also pivoted back with us to say, Yeah, but don't forget about Gunner Stockton. It's a pivotal spring for Gunner Stockton. Gunner needs to take the next step. Gunner needs to do this. Gunner needs to do that. And if there are any moments in which Gunner is limited during the spring practice, then at least in theory, somewhat, Gunner's opportunity to get all the growth that he can get this spring is also limited too. And I'm going to tell you, we're going to record this tomorrow to air on Friday's show. We're going to be lucky to have David Pollack with us here this week on DawgNation Daily, poured by Dr. Pepper. I'm really excited about that. And David's been in the news this week for something he said with Aaron Murray on Murray's podcast as it relates to Gunner Stockton. And I think that David's viewpoint on Gunner comes from a really easy to understand place, that a guy who had some great games a year ago, and we've essentially said the same thing, you probably can't play better than Gunner did at Tennessee, for instance. October against Ole Miss, probably the game against Texas. Gunner at his very best was as good as almost any quarterback in the country could have played last season. If there is one wish that we do have for Gunner is, can there be more of a through line week to week of consistent play that more closely matches your high-end performance? Because while I just rattled off 3 very high-end performances where Gunner Stockton was clearly at his best, there are also examples of probably the game against Georgia Tech, and you can cite others, where pretty clearly Gunner didn't seem to bring the same performance out of himself. And so this spring, we would say, is crucial in establishing that consistency that I know that he seeks and Georgia fans want for him as well. So in light of the fact that a lot of folks have told us, guests on this show, this is an important spring for Gunner. He's got to take that growth, that next step, setting himself up to be just a more consistent week-to-week player here this fall. In light of all of that, what David Pollack, who's going to be on Friday's show, said this week with Aaron Murray, I think is incredibly relevant. This from the Aaron Murray podcast.
If Gunner Stockton's the same quarterback he was a year ago, Georgia has no chance to win a Natty. They have no chance. What you're talking about, yes, you saw that in spurts. I saw him grow. I saw him put more touch on the football instead of trying to throw through everybody's chest, which he has a tendency to do. It's all fastballs. Like, I like some changeups. Another thing I saw him change arm angles without taking a big wind-up and throw, which I really, really like, because the dude's got plenty of arm strength. To turn and flick it ain't no thing for him. So understanding that. But I think it's more personality-driven with Gunner Stockton than anything. He's a kid that doesn't want to mess up. He's a kid that wants to be perfect. Those are hard things, man, because life ain't perfect. Quarterback dang sure ain't perfect.
I think that's really smart from David there. And obviously David's got a very matter-of-fact speaking style that works well for podcast in this era of YouTube shorts and clips that, well, if he doesn't get better, he's not winning a national championship. That's a very matter-of-fact way of saying it that works really well for a short clip like that. But the larger message, a little bit more complicated, a little bit more nuanced. And I think that David probably explains that well, too. That, listen, best games, very, very good. Being more consistent week to week in the path you take to get there, and the tolerance for imperfection in yourself, in the circumstances, in the situation, just making do with whatever it is without everything necessarily having to be so precise. I think that's pretty sharp, and I think that analysis is pretty strong from David. As I said, we'll record with David tomorrow to air on Friday, but we'll talk about all of that with him later on this week. But this is why anything related to missed practice time or not completely fully 100%, even if it's only to a small degree, this is why that's going to get a lot of attention, because it is repeatedly been said to us, pivotal spring for Gunner Stockton. You can put attention on the wide receivers and the pathway that that position group will take to helping Georgia be more explosive. And obviously a lot of that will come on that group's shoulders. But it's also on Gunner Stockton, too, to find a new level of performance, to find a new gear, and to shift into that gear to help this Georgia offense be everything that it can be. We will, as people like to say on the internet these days, we'll monitor this situation. We'll find out if anything more substantial comes from this, if Kirby Smart ever gives any kind of confirmation or refutation one way or another. You know, that'll be up to Kirby to provide that. Fans, for now, though, are going to say what they say. We don't take anything related to the health situation all that seriously, but we have learned to take the opportunity this spring to get better for Gunner. We do take that very seriously. And seeing what this looks like on G-Day as a foreshadowing for what will also be this fall, you better believe we're going to be tuned in very closely to watch all of that take shape. My name's Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, poured today by Dr. Pepper. Let me just give you a quick apology. I know my voice cracked a couple times during the first segment. It really been going very well the last few months, no issue whatsoever. I won't get into it, but very disappointed to have that happen here last couple of days. Feel like I've been battling that a bit, so I appreciate your patience on all of that. And boy, you better believe I love the rich one-of-a-kind flavor of Dr. Pepper. Maybe that's what I need to soothe my throat. Maybe I just need to call time out, drink a Dr. Pepper, and get right back to it. Obviously, after every show, that's the treat that I look forward to. Always enjoy a little bit of that with my lunch. It's just one of those things that gives me a pick-me-up and gives me something to look forward to. Just a nice little daily fix of my Dr. Pepper. It is something that's very special to me, and it can be for you too. In fact, I would encourage you. Everybody deserves something to look forward to. And each day, Dr. Pepper is just a nice, simple, straightforward thing that gives me a little bit of what I want. And the cool thing is, there are all kinds of varieties. A lot of you are very different from me. The truth is, I'm just a pretty basic guy. You know, basic sometimes gets used as an insult. I certainly don't take it as an insult. That's just who I am. Honestly, I like Diet Dr. Pepper, and I drink it all the time. But for some of you, you're like, when they bring out the specialty flavors, the creative options, boy, you love all that. You're thinking about strawberries and cream. You're thinking about Dr. Pepper Blackberry, Blackberry Zero Sugar, all of that fun stuff. You're into all of that. And there's even more on the way from Dr. Pepper in the future, too. I think there's a very good chance that the creamy coconut may be coming back, and that's going to be a lot of fun. So we love having Dr. Pepper as a part of our program. It's always fun for me when brands that I truly, genuinely love are a part of what we do around here, and that is what Dr. Pepper is. So please, as you're doing your grocery shopping, wherever you are, pick up the rich one-of-a-kind flavor of Dr. Pepper. We think you're going to really enjoy, and we're certainly glad to have them as a part of our program here today. Okay. Before we're done, great guests. It's Davin Bellamy later. We'll get Mike Griffith here in just a moment. Busy show for us. But prior to any of that, though, let's get ready to go around the doghouse, presented today by our friends at Georgia Farm Bureau. And we did get last week a chance to hear from Kirby Smart, and a couple of things that Kirby gave us insight on is a couple of the things going on with the Georgia defense and their desire to be more disruptive. And when Kirby talks about being more disruptive, one of the things we think he means by that is with the pass rush. We think that Georgia wants to seek better pass rush here for this upcoming season. Obviously, statistically speaking, a year ago, that was not a stellar category for Georgia. And clearly they want to be better at that here this year. And one of the guys charged with helping make that happen is the outside linebackers coach, newly hired Larry Knight. Now, Knight wasn't famous, certainly to me, before Georgia hired him, but he seems to have pretty interesting credentials. He's been called, I don't know if this is just a moniker somebody made up or if this is a real thing, but he's been called a pass rush specialist. He is a guy that clearly seems to have a love for teaching technique. And when Smart spoke to the media last week, he gave us a little bit more insight into what he thinks Larry Knight's going to bring to the table. This is what Kirby Smart said.
Larry's come in and done a great job really quickly. You know, he interviewed, we thought he did an outstanding job in the interview, very detailed in terms of things he believes in. He's worked for some really good coaches. And he's getting to know the guys still. He's been in workouts with them for a couple weeks now, and getting on the grass should be fun for him to get to coach those guys and get to know them. And he's been around defenses similar to ours, and he's very intelligent. He'll pick up on the defense quickly and do a great job helping our unit perform.
One of the things I'm looking forward to talking about on the show the next few days, the two big missions that Georgia says it's on, we want to be more explosive offensively. We want to be more disruptive defensively. One of the things you're seeing come out of Georgia on all of this, their plan for doing this isn't just to try harder. Hey, we're gonna really strain and push ourselves. We're just going to try harder and hope for the best. It seems like that Georgia is going to employ some tactics or improve technique, that there is more than just hoping and wishing as the plan for how you achieve these things, that pretty clearly Georgia seems like it wants to change the way that it goes about its pass rush behavior as a way of creating more of those opportunities. Later on today's show, we'll talk to Davin Bellamy specifically about what he thinks all of this means. But I thought it was interesting yesterday. We got a chance to hear from Georgia outside linebacker Quintavius Johnson, who I thought really was a real find for Georgia a year ago. Even better things maybe in store for him here this year. And so the question came up of, well, if Larry Knight, the pass rush specialist, is here to help create more disruption for the defense, not the only thing. Larry Knight's just a part of that plan. But what specifically is Georgia trying to do right now to improve its pass rush overall? And I thought that Q gave us a little bit of insight on that. Here is what he said about how Georgia seeks to improve its pass rush overall.
Just being comfortable, trusting our eyes up front, and rushing as a unit, and also just relying on each other, relying on the guy next to you.
So simple to the point, but also pretty specific too. We're going to trust our eyes. We're going to rush as a unit. And obviously I could share thoughts on that, but I think it's better later in the show just to ask Davin Bellamy. When they say trust their eyes, what do they mean? When they say, hey, we're going to rush as a unit, I think I have an idea of what that means, but specifically, what does that mean for Georgia based on pretty interesting information that Quintavious Johnson shares there? We'll do more of that with Davin Bellamy here coming up in just a moment. Also, the other plan that seems that Georgia has in place for how you maintain what you want to be able to do defensively, how you improve your pass rush, how you seek greater disruption is with the talent you put on the field too. And we think that Georgia's got good young guys waiting the wings, Chase Linton, Darren Kennebon, Isaiah Gibson. You can run through all of these names. But they also go out and make judicious use of the transfer portal to bring in a guy like Amaris Williams, for instance. And part of the attempt, we would say, to upgrade Georgia's disruptive defensive abilities is just by putting maybe more experienced talent on the field, guys who've now been in the program or going outside your program and bringing in a guy like Amaris who has pretty sterling athletic credentials. That's also part of this plan too. And if you want to go back to last week, Kirby Smart talked about how Amaris and these outside linebackers who've been in the program, how they can help contribute to all of that. This is what Kirby Smart said.
Yeah, we'll find out what he can add. He's certainly a quick and twitchy guy that we recruited out of high school. We know a lot about. He's got to, be able to play within our system, understand our system, but add value. He could start by taking the reps he's going to get this spring. We've got 3 young guys that didn't get a lot of playing time last year. I want to see where they are. Q's continuing to grow. So, with Gabe out, it's going to open a door for a lot of guys to get reps and grow and play. And I kind of want to see what they can do. Kamari's here, it's a mid-year freshman. So we want to see the growth in that room and see those guys continue to get better.
I want to close up this topic by referencing something we said yesterday, which is we heard Christian Miller speak at Georgia's Pro Day, and he talked about the brotherhood and how that's an authentic thing and a genuine thing. That's a very real thing for Georgia. In the midst of this discussion, I can't help but think back to some of the stuff that Christian Miller said yesterday for the simple reason that these stats, the kinds of pass rushing stuff, tackles for loss, they're coveted. And for the Georgia players in the room, I'm talking about the outside linebackers room, the meeting room they all gather in, I'm sure it's good news to them to say, hey, we want to be more disruptive, because in their mind they hear, oh, that's more sacks for me, which, let's face it, can command you more dollars in the NIL front, make you more attractive commodity on that market, can probably get the attention of NFL draft scouts. At least that's the perception that exists there. But at a place like Georgia, even in its best years where it had really nice stats across the board, a lot of these numbers end up getting shared amongst a lot of good players. And maybe no individual player gets everything he could get because he's sharing this with other players. And you might think listen, if I was in the same position, it'd be easy to imagine I might be this way. You might think that a guy that has a chance to be really good, such as, say, Quintavious Johnson, who's been here, who showed some promise and has a bigger opportunity this year, that he might want to hoard all of this opportunity for himself and say, listen, if this is what we want to do, and based on the experience I got last year, I played more than these other young guys, I can be a double-digit sack guy. I can do the kind of thing that Georgia players rarely do, get double-digit sacks, get a lot of attention, and just be a talked-about household name. And there's a lot of incentive that could come his way for being that way. But very much in keeping with what Georgia's all about, that doesn't appear to be what Quintavious Johnson did at all. And this was really interesting. You just heard Kirby Smart at the beginning of that clip talk about how Amaris Williams, coming here from Auburn, former elite recruit, how he's going to try to ingrain himself in what Georgia's doing defensively. And that obviously potentially takes away, if Amaris has the kind of year that some suggest that he could have, that takes away some of the statistical potential for a guy like Quintavius Johnson and others. But apparently that didn't stop Johnson in his own telling from doing everything he could, as he bragged about yesterday, with being instrumental in getting Amaris Williams to come to Georgia. I thought this was really interesting and very much in keeping with what we've come to expect from UGA. Here's one more time Quintavious Johnson saying, hey, Amaris Williams, give me the credit for getting him here.
Amaris, that's my guy. I feel like I've played a major part in his recruiting, and I feel like he fits the role and what we want him to play, and he's similar to Gabe Harris.
What role did you play in his recruitment?
I mean, just talking to him before he even committed, having that relationship with him when he was over at the other place in the paint jobs.
So I think it's really compelling that Quintavious, who could say, man, this is my outside linebacker room and I want all the stats. I want to be on the field. I don't want to share anything. He says, no, I want to bring in Amaris Williams, even though we're going to be sharing playing time. We're going to be sharing stats. We're going to be sharing glory, pats on the back. All of that's not going to be divided amongst us all and another mouth to feed here in Amaris Williams. But I wanted him here. I think that's really cool. And it's also interesting, and we're going to play more of the Quintavious Johnson stuff in the days to come, because Quintavious, very nice yesterday, just rat-a-tat-tat, reporters saying, tell me about Darren Akinabon, tell me about Chase Linton, tell me about Isaiah Gibson. And Quintavious basically just held court and said, I've seen this and I saw this. You can go to our DawgNation YouTube page and see the entire thing. We'll eventually play more of it on the show when we have time. But on Amaris Williams, he says, listen, as Georgia fans hoped would be true. He says, reminds me of Gabe Harris. What if that's true? Just before we bring on Mike, before we wrap up this topic, what if that's true? What if Georgia has another Gabe Harris? Let me ask you a question you already know the answer to. Would you have liked to had another Gabe Harris in the Sugar Bowl this year when you didn't have the Gabe Harris against Ole Miss? Yes, you would. Georgia does not go out and get a million transfers. Obviously, a lot of teams far more transfer heavy than Georgia does. But Georgia is willing to use the transfer portal. And if you read some of the stuff on, like, say, the ESPN.coms or the CBS Sports or some of the On3 stuff, some of the stuff, from the national outlets, there are a lot of people who think that Amaris Williams can make a very big impact on Georgia. And it is not a small thing to hear a guy like you say, yeah, another Gabe Harris. Georgia now has two Gabe Harrises, Amaris and Gabe, to go along with what Q is and what the next generation of pass rushers could be there too. Some of this stuff, to be more disruptive defensively, could just be strictly related to personnel. Gabe is fully healthy. Amaris Williams can match some of what he does. Quintavious Johnson, now another year older. Second-year guys ready to step up and show what they're all about. Some of this is just as simple as that. A lot of talent in a group ready to break out in a big way. But fascinating to hear Quintavious Johnson give us deep insight yesterday on exactly what Georgia wants to be defensively and how his position group, including himself, can help make all of that happen. And that is Around the Doghouse. It is presented today by our friends at Georgia Farm Bureau. Now, in Georgia, we have a great history. We have a great tradition. And so much of that traces back to Georgians just love the land. They respect their own land. They appreciate the land in all across our state. And I drive all the time. I just feel like I'm on the road 100 hours a week, it seems like. And when I'm driving through rural Georgia, which is most of the time, I tell you, man, you just see these rolling hills, the farmland. There is something just deeply spiritual to me about that. And I just love it. I love that people take good care of the land. And I love that this land is so fertile and it produces food that people all across the world eats. And our friends at Georgia Farm Bureau love that too. That's why for such a long time, they have been such great supporters of Georgia's farmers. They are just an incredible friend to the agricultural community, and the same way they've supported Georgia's farmers through their insurance needs, they can provide that for you too. Auto insurance, you have to have it. Home insurance, you need that. Life insurance, if you haven't thought about that, taking care of those you love, that's incredibly important too. And our friends at Georgia Farm Bureau are ready to provide you great service. We say it all the time. They are always the home team. What that means is that when you pick up the phone and you have insurance-related questions, our friends at Georgia Farm Bureau are going to have really strong answers for you. So please give them a call, 877-404-1050. That's 877-404-1050, or online, GFBinsurance.com. Find out today why Georgia Farm Bureau is always the home team. All right, great to have all of you with us here today. Before we're done, Davin Bellamy with more insight on some of the stuff that Quintavius Johnson had to say. But for now, on everything happening around Georgia football and, of course, all across the landscape of college athletics, let's talk to Mike Griffith here today. DawgNation Daily, poured by Dr. Pepper.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Mike, I want to bring you in. First of all, it's great to have you here. Thanks for your time as always. I want to bring you in on something that I was just saying. So 2 days ago, we played clips in the show of Christian Miller, a guy I know you know well, covered him at Georgia. And he talked about how the whole conversation about, like, say, brotherhood at Georgia and that kind of stuff. He said, I thought very interesting choice of words. He says, this is genuine here. This is authentic. I'm paraphrasing, but that's basically what he said. And I think we do see evidence of that. Now, listen, someone like me has probably a tendency to want to hype that stuff up and make a big deal about that kind of thing because I do like it. But when you see Quintavius Johnson yesterday say, a guy like Amaris Williams, who is really going to come in and crowd his position group a little bit. If Amaris has the kind of year that we think he could, that takes away some of the stats that Quintavious Johnson could get. The chance of being a double-digit sack guy, for instance, that goes down for everybody when you add another talented player into that defensive end, outside linebacker, edge rushing hybrid area. You know, that's another mouth to feed and all of that. And yet Quintavious Johnson yesterday, in so many words, speaking with the media, was like, hey, Amaris Williams, I'm the reason he's here. I'm the one that helped get him here. He basically says, give me a pat on the back for being a good recruiter for my program, even though theoretically he's bringing in a guy that's going to share some of the glory that Q could get for himself. And I don't think that Georgia fans should miss that kind of thing. I think that's important, and I think it's cool. And we do see that replicated year after year, and I do believe that's part of Georgia's secret sauce. Do you agree?
Absolutely. I mean, I think the buy-in is huge, and I think, you know, Devin, I know you're having him on in a bit, but, you know, great athletes want to be challenged. They want that guy to compete and push him every day. You know, that's the nature of a great competitor. That's why they're at Georgia to begin with. I mean, look, you're not signing up for Georgia because you think you're going to get on the field quickly and have all the glory to yourself. You know, you're signing up for Georgia because you know you're going to be pushed every day. You're going to compete against the best, and it's going to prepare you for a professional career. You know, and I think that level of buy-in is what makes Georgia a championship program. You've got to have an attitude, particularly on defense, you know, that you do your job and your assignment sound, and you're counting on that guy next to you to do his job too. And again, you know, I'm always careful when I make military analogies because I certainly don't want to offend any veterans or make light of people putting their lives on the line for the country. But there really is a military mentality to this of covering that guy in the foxhole next to you and having his back and being there for him and being strong and dealing with adversity together. And when you go through adverse situations, when you go through those early workouts, when you're pushed to the max and you're asked to do more than you've ever done, after you've experienced that, there's a bonding experience, Brandon. I'd compare it to watching you perform 4 days in a row on a DawgNation cruise. You're spent by the end of that.
Sure thing.
You spread yourself pretty thin. You've put yourself on stage, and you have to give your best every time out. It can be exhausting. But at the same time, when we finish our cruise and when we're done, interacting, with Georgia fans and having the time of our lives too, by the way, we're very passionate about that. But, it's something that we've experienced together. You and I have been through 4 DawgNation cruises together. How many games have you and I sat next to one another in the press box and experienced the highs and lows and both gone through the mental gymnastics of how we're going to present this opportunity? And it's kind of helped make our DawgNation team special. And I think people watching and listening can probably equate that to their workplaces and things they've gone through with coworkers or maybe family members, crisis, right? At Georgia, everybody's all in. They understand there's a standard, and they understand now they're 4 years removed from their last national championship. And I thought Raylan Wilson really set the tone at the beginning of spring drills when he said, hey, I came here with some goals in mind, and I got some unfinished business. You don't want to be that Georgia Bulldog that leaves this program without a national championship ring. You have to answer to people every single day about where the standard is at and what Georgia has accomplished on the football field. And there's an expectation, and you want guys around you that are like-minded, that are working towards that goal, that are going to push you and help you get through those tough days and help you be at your best. That's the buy-in that Georgia has that so many other programs lack. And you see it every year at the end of the year when some of these teams mail it in. No greater example than the Florida State Orange Bowl when Georgia destroyed that program. They're still broke. They still don't have a culture, right? Georgia has maintained that culture. They're competitive every single year because they're recruiting guys that maintain this mentality. And that's the messaging you heard. And I think that's probably what's got you enthused about this football team this year.
No, I think that's really well said. You also wrote a story the other day at DawgNation.com about, how Kirby Smart's focusing his time right now. And the sense that I get across college football is that I was very curious how the absence of a spring portal window might make spring feel different, and whether or not coaches would really trust that they weren't going to be heavily challenged on this. That, there are a lot of lawyers who make a big show of saying you don't have to go in the portal to transfer, and they basically think they have legal precedent on their side to say those things. I'm not a lawyer. I can't necessarily judge that one way or another, but the vibe that I'm getting, and your story touches on this because of some, possible punishments if you do take a player who transfers without going through the sanctioned portal process. It seems like college athletics feels like they figured this out, that this thing in particular, we're going to one portal window and all of that happens in that particular portal window. The spring won't be as, wild as folks have worried that it might be. I do feel like they think they've at least got this figured out. A, do you agree with that? And B, do you think it's actually going to play out that way once we get into late April into May, where the last couple of years we have had an active portal session?
Yeah, I'm very optimistic that this measure is going to be passed by the cabinet, and we're talking about a coach being suspended for 6 games, and we're talking about a significant fine for universities. Where players transfer outside of the portal window. This is so important because you've got to have roster management. These are some of the guardrails that we've talked about. We know that when NIL and the new transfer portal legislation came to pass, there were a lot of unintended consequences. No one could have predicted just how crazy it would get. And there's more measures that need to be taken for sure. Standardization of agent dealings being one of them. But I think that
Did we just freeze with Mike? We may have. Let's see if we can get Mike back on, because I think he's in the midst of making a good answer here. So a little bit of a freeze there on that. But just wild day. My voice is cracking, guest is freezing, and we're just riding with the moment here. But if we can get Mike back on, even though we have to do it via phone, I do want to give Mike his chance to finish that answer. And as we prepare for that, I want to touch on something that he said in particular, which is you've got to have roster management. And the fear that I have when we talk about these kinds of things, and we are forced to talk about these kinds of things a lot, is there is just so much mumbo jumbo around it that people have a tendency to tune out because nobody really speaks in very clear specifics about what we want, what we need. There is, I think, this general feeling among many fans that, boy, something needs to be changed, but exactly what it is. Mike, I appreciate you being back here, and I'll finish my point in a moment, but I thought that you were talking about something interesting about, hey, we got to have some sort of idea of roster management. Coaches need at least some certainty around that. That's around the time we dropped you. So do you mind just picking up your answer, because I thought it was a good one?
Yeah, appreciate it. So, if you think back to last year when Kirby Smart was talking about the incoming class and the transfers at the start of spring, there was some concern what kind of shape they were in, how coachable were they? These guys need to learn to be coached. I think by eliminating the second portal window, you erase a lot of the doubt. You're not competing for these guys anymore. You're not worrying about retention anymore. Your team is your team. The players know that. You know that. You're able to invest more time in them because you're not trying to negotiate who's going to stick around in the spring. You're not having to spend time scouting other teams for potential replacements. So the focus is on the student athlete and on the team building. And I think that when we reflect on what Kirby said to us last week at the start of spring drills, it was a much different tenor than he had the year before. And I think that's a direct result of that portal. I also think it's a direct result of having a returning starting quarterback. If we think about where Georgia was last year, they were kind of picking up the pieces, BA. Yeah. They lost 17 guys to the NFL, 13 drafted, 4 other guys good enough to sign as free agents and make the team. That's a hunk. In addition to the guys that left through the portal, Damon Wilson, most notably. You were talking about what if you had another Gabe Hall? Well, you should have. Okay, we don't need to recreate the Damon Wilson history, but that definitely hurt Georgia. And I think that with these portal restrictions that are coming, the cabinet is going to pass this measure. That's going to deter a lot of these schools from tampering, because that was a big issll. It'll still be an issue, but now there's going to be some penalties behind it. And now with people like Josh Brooks serving on the NCAA Oversight Committee that came up with this emergency legislation, the NCAA can once again be proactive instead of reactive. Now that the dust is starting to settle and we're starting to see, where the pieces are falling, and obviously there's some things that are, being proposed in Congress. President Trump has proposed a panel with some of the decision makers and key figures, Jerry Moorhead included, I believe. So I think that we're starting to see some semblance of order. And to your point, I think that's good for the game.
So let me finish around this idea, which is, I was saying this just briefly when you dropped. I think that fans have a very high tune-out factor on some of this because it all just seems like crosstalk. It's a lot of overlapping ideas, and I think there's this general sense on the part of what I would assume is the majority of fans paying close attention to this, that something needs to change, there needs to be some more stability, that there's too much craziness. But I think the key leaders have had a problem articulating a clear message. To go back to the thing with the president of the day, people think, well, this whole thing was a mess, a little bit of a photo op. The one thing that could change that is if those that represent institutions, especially the SEC, which I care more about, you just got to have one clear ask. If it's a bunch of ideas and a bunch of, academic sounding, mundane talk, everybody tunes that out. But I think a moment ago you touched on, if I had the potential to be like the autocratic leader, which is obviously my goal. If I had the chance to be college football's dictator, my one big ask, the one thing I want is just give me some stability about putting my roster together. When my roster is together, I want the certainty that I'm done now, and I'll work and do whatever, because eventually all financial markets eventually stabilize. All financial markets eventually become more efficient over time. That's just the way that goes. The NIL market will eventually take on a level of efficiency it doesn't currently have. Even if it's high dollar figures, eventually that will stabilize. But when you have this craziness of how you get players and whether it be through tampering or whatever else, that's the thing you need a rule around. So if I had President Trump's ear, or if I had the Congress's ear, that's my one ask. Can I have some sort of rule which will stand up in court about when the roster has a lid on it and we're no longer fighting to keep our players? If you could get that one thing in college sports, I almost don't think you need anything else.
It's a strong beginning. And to your point, a lot of people took the White House gathering lightly, but what it did is it brought everybody to one place. It brought all the animals to one watering hole. Now there is a group discussion, and that's just at the superficial level. What meetings took place outside of that? What introductions were made? What decision makers crossed paths that otherwise wouldn't have? So I think it was a unification of forces of people all trying to deal with different parts of the, let's call it what it is, a situation, right? And to your point, prioritizing the roster management, the NCAA Oversight Committee saying, hey, this is where it starts. This is just the beginning. There'll be other meetings. There'll be other measures taken. I mentioned agent dealings the other day and the standardization of agent dealings. This will also help with the organization. This will also protect the student athlete. This will also provide a level of standardization that you need to have. I mean, you look at all the professional sports leagues, NFL, NBA, NHL, they have their unions. Well, obviously that's a bit of a controversial subject, whether you unionize student athletes, but at the very least you have people talking. And now that you've got people talking, and now that they're proposing, different committees with leadership figures on there, you can bring a level of organization, but you had to have some unification and some group discussion just to start I compare it to DawgNation Daily. Every day you come on the air and you lead a discussion, and most days I will look at the comments, and the commenters, they'll have their discussions. The issues will be discussed. Everybody takes something from DawgNation Daily. Most often you'll lead the discussion and you'll bring out some tremendous talking points. But sometimes the people that are watching, they'll be having their own discussion, BA.
Oftentimes.
It's amazing what these folks talk about. So it's the unification of people in one place that have a passion for something, obviously Georgia fans in this case. But when we talk about what President Trump accomplished with that meeting, it was bringing decision makers to the same meeting table to discuss the issues that are confronting college football, which is obviously what drives the revenue train in collegiate athletics as a whole.
Mike, interesting stuff. Thanks for your time. We'll read plenty more from you at DawgNation.com. And, of course, have you back here on DawgNation Daily, powered by Dr. Pepper very soon. And before long, we'll see you on that DawgNation cruise, too, which I'm very much looking forward to.
You better get in shape, BA. It's going to be 4 hard days.
That's exactly right. Mike, good stuff. Thanks a lot.
All right. We'll see you. Thank you.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Davin Bellamy coming up in a moment. Good interview with him. Also, before we do our SEC Through, let me remind you about our friends at the UGA Bookstore. And we are thrilled on G-Day Saturday. Once again, we're back at the UGA Bookstore for our DawgNation postgame show. It's something we look forward to each and every year, one of our great experiences. And I've got to tell you, might not be a bad idea to look sharp for that DawgNation cruise, which leaves that following week, to get dressed up in some brand new Georgia gear from the UGA Bookstore. I'm talking about like the Peter Millar and the Alma Reserve, Tommy Bahama. That always goes well when you're taking a trip to the Bahamas. A little Tommy Bahama UGA apparel. That's never a bad thing. Our friends at the UGA Bookstore, they have it all, and they'll have us there on this Saturday. Also, with other sports going on around Georgia right now, I'm thinking about baseball and softball. You've got a chance to get those NIL jerseys and customize opportunities. All of that is yours, too. I'm telling you, I've been going to the UGA Bookstore since I was a child. It's never been better. It's recently renovated. The UGA apparel has never been hotter, and the selection, the offerings, they've just got it all. So if you can be in Athens, hey, come see us on G-Day Saturday. That's awesome. But also go shop in store. And if you can't get to Athens, next best option, shopping online, UGAbookstore.com. That is UGAbookstore.com. But selfishly, I want to tell you, we're back there right next to the Tate Student, blah, blah, blah. Let me try to speak English. Right next to the Tate Student Center across from Sanford Stadium. We'll be there on G-Day Saturday. All the UGA apparel will be out for folks to make their selections with, and we'll see you there for that. The UGA Bookstore right there next to Sanford Stadium. All right, let's do a quick SEC through. Then we've got Davin Bellamy. That's going to be a lot of fun. I thought that John Summerall had an interesting, not quite a joke, it's not that funny, but we do see coaches doing this kind of thing more often than we used to, where in the midst of a press conference, obviously Florida's going through its spring practice, Summerall basically alludes to the fact that a lot of Florida fans wish it was Lane Kiffin and not Summerall as the Florida coach. His line is, but things seem to be working out okay here right now. There was a time in which coaches just didn't acknowledge this sort of thing, but now I think there's a little bit of freedom, and a lot of this is probably led by Kiffin himself. When something's going on that everybody's aware of, why not at least make a joke about it? Why not acknowledge it? But at the same time, for Florida, this is one of those things that is going to hang over the John Summerall era. In sports, we just speak in the language of comparisons. And, for instance, if you live in Atlanta, I don't follow the NBA that closely, but you know how when the Hawks got Trae Young, could have gotten Luka Doncic, there was always going to be the Trae-Luka comparison. Now, both players are playing for different teams than they ended up with on draft night, but the Trae-Luka comparison was always going to go on. Earlier than that in football, Peyton Manning, Ryan Leaf, always going to be a comparison between the two. And sometimes there's a clear winner in these comparisons, sometimes there's not. But in the case of Florida, it is always going to be true that a lot of Florida fans are going to look in on this situation with John Summerall and wonder what might have been if we could have gotten Lane Kiffin, especially since for many, Kiffin reminds them of the persona that Steve Spurrier used to project. And make no mistake about this. Urban Meyer is the most successful coach in Florida history, but Urban Meyer is not the archetype that Florida fans seek. I have, even for rivals, I have a little bit of intuition about fan behavior. Florida fans always and forever are looking to replace Steve Spurrier. They're not looking for the next Urban Meyer. They're looking for the next Steve Spurrier, and they think that Kiffin could have been that. Now it's Summerall. Summerall seems to have a decent amount of talent at his disposal this year. They're going to try to get something out of Aaron Philo. We're going to find out what happens to those lousy, stinking Gators here this year. Speaking of NIL and transfer portal stuff, I saw where former Auburn coach, now United States Senator, soon to be, I guess, the possible governor of Alabama, Tommy Tuberville, has proposed NIL transfer. It's really more transfer portal legislation. I keep saying NIL, but it's really more transfer portal legislation, where in his telling of it, you'd have 5 years to play 5 seasons. You know, no more red shirt, anything like that. It's just 5 years. If you want to play for 5 seasons, you can do that. You get one transfer with no penalty, and then after that, it's the old school, set out a year for every transfer you make. Now, who knows where this legislation goes? It very likely could go nowhere. But here's the one thing I would tell you to notice about this. We've been talking about this now for several months. There is more of an appetite in politics on both sides of the aisle to talk about this sort of thing within the halls of Congress, that there is a little more motivation now to get involved legislatively as it relates to these kind of issues. And I will tell you that, and my promise to you remains the same. We don't talk politics on this show, whether it be one side doing it or the other side doing it. We, for the most part, try to leave this stuff alone. But I still believe there is a potential political solution here. But the people who are the main stakeholders in college athletics, whether it's Tuberville or some of the others or whoever else, either side of the aisle, there's really bipartisan going on here, at least broadly speaking. Maybe not quite viewing politics as such a dirty word and realizing that the appetite for handling this in Washington is growing, and that if you seek a solution for college football, college athletics in general, you might have to consider all options, and Washington, D.C. might be one of those options. Let me say this very quick because I want to get to Davin. The other big news in college athletics today is that North Carolina has fired Coach Hubert Davis. This is big for a few reasons. A, this is going to break the chain of Dean Smith influence on UNC basketball, almost certainly going to go outside the North Carolina family for the next coach. That's one thing of note here. Here's the other thing. While ACC basketball over the last few years has diminished in importance, the truth is North Carolina is still a gigantic brand, a far bigger fan base than you realize. This coaching search is going to be a very big deal. It could get Todd Golden from Florida involved in this. Honestly, I'd watch Billy Donovan. I mean, there's a chance that Kentucky could have hired Donovan when they hired Mark Pope. They probably just weren't quite patient enough. I think that Donovan's a potential factor in this. We like coaching rumors around here. We like coaching carousel. The UNC coaching search is going to be a big deal. We'll make that your SEC through. I'm late, so let me jump right to Davin Bellamy here. Davin, appreciate your time as always. So glad to have you as a part of our program here today. I want to talk about some of the stuff that Quintavius Johnson said in a moment because I'm really interested in your insight on that. But let me go back to the beginning of the show here just for a second. By the way, you got your Yankees cap on. Yankees play tonight on Netflix, right? The season opens for them against the San Francisco Giants, so Major League Baseball's back. We're happy about that. But, you know, we hear from David Pollack that, hey, Gunner Stockton's got to be more consistent. You got to play better game to game. The best games for Gunner were outstanding, but you need a little more consistency probably week to week. How do you think Gunner gets that, and how can a spring practice help Gunner perhaps get there?
Yeah, man, the biggest fan for him. So last year, I mean, he was amazing of making plays, go that, weren't there. But what we talked about, a lot was the batted balls, more touch on the passes through the middle. You're starting to see, man, it's 2026, and these quarterbacks have a lot of different angles that they can throw from. And to be, honest with you, at the next level, getting the ball batted down is the quarterback's fault. So that's one thing. I want to see him try the arm angles, because we were just getting too many, batted balls. But the best thing about spring is you can't, you can, but you can't scramble. So it's going to force him to play from the pocket and be on time, with his reads. Gunner was, in my opinion, when we got to get to 3rd and 7s, if the first read wasn't there, he did such a great job of creating, extra time and more, plays with his legs. But on those 3rd and 7s and those 3rd and longs, when I just need you to drop back in the pocket, when that back foot hit, the ball got to be gone. Those are some of the things where we lacked. And you see that when it comes to mobile QBs, because they know in their whole, career, they've been able to get themselves, out of trouble. So the best thing about spring ball is he's going to have a black jersey on, so he's not going to get touched. So when he's in the pocket, he's not worrying about trying to escape, and just being another year, a spring, another rep of winning from the pocket. And that's what I want to see.
We had some really good stuff from Quintavius Johnson on the show a little earlier, and I thought Q was incredibly insightful. And I think some of this is also valuable to help you kind of fill in the gaps for some of us on it. He said the question is, how do you improve the pass rush this year? Technique-wise, what do you do? And one of the things that Quintavius Johnson said is, we want to trust our eyes more. Now, I could probably come up with a guess of what I think he means by that. But as somebody who basically played the same position that Q does, what do you think he means when he says we want to trust our eyes more with pass rush?
Well, I mean, the first thing you see with Georgia, especially when I was breaking down the tape was, and I've said this so many times on the team meeting is, when these guys are getting off the ball, their helmet is almost, head to head with the offensive tackle's helmet. And that just means my defensive end is too high. Well, why is my defensive end too high? It's because he's trying to look at the quarterback instead of beating the man and then getting to the quarterback. As you get more seasoned and you start to have, all these coaches, one thing a coach told me was if you're going to be in a fight and you're in a bar and a guy is standing in front of you and you got to fight two people, right? You don't talk to yourself, into a situation and you didn't know that he had a friend that was waiting. Well, I can't look at the guy behind him and fight this guy.
Yeah.
So what he means by trusting their eyes is a lot of the Georgia players, they're getting stuck at the top of the rush. And when I say get stuck, I mean, if you watch the tape, it just seems like we get to a place to where we're both just bear dancing. Well, that's because my pad level is too high because I'm trying to look at the quarterback, right? So what a defensive end is taught to do is see what the offensive lineman is giving me, beat him, and through film study, I know what the quarterback is going to be, right? Until you're a very seasoned pro rusher, you can't look at the quarterback and still work your moves, and work your hands. And these guys, at the stage that they're at now, they don't have that in their tool belt where they don't have to look at the person they're fighting. So that's what he means. And it's blatant on tape because when you're trying to look where the quarterback is, pause, and then when a quarterback runs, I tear off and go get the sack, that doesn't really translate to getting to the quarterback at a alarming rate.
Sure.
What translate is, I know I got to beat this guy and my quarterback is going to be behind him on a 7-step drop or a 5-step drop. So that's where the dogs have to mature, and that's what all comes with being a seasoned pass rusher is training your eyes because not just them, I've done it, and it took years of fixing not to worry about the quarterback. Let me worry about beating the man first and then go getting the quarterback.
I think it's really interesting. He also talked about we want to make sure we pass rush as a group. Once again, I feel like I have a pretty good idea of what that means, but how does that help Georgia get more of this? Obviously, we know Georgia likes to play as an ensemble cast, but in this particular case, when they just need better pass rush overall, how does what Q describes as group pass rush dynamic, how does that help with that?
Well, you realize that when you got 4 guys trying to get a sack, it usually doesn't end well. You have to have a good team of guys who, understand that I may be getting a slide. That means the O-line is sliding to me. So my opposite guy may have the one-on-one. So it may be my job just to push the pocket because if this guy, where he didn't get the slide, if he gets a free run at the quarterback, I don't want to mess this layup up by trying to go get a sack, running myself, out of the play because I have the slide or majority of the eyes, on me. The best D-line rooms I've ever been with are when guys rush with, each other, with a plan. Majority of the time, Trent, Thompson was next to me. And through practice, through camp, I knew what type of player he was, what type of rusher he was, if he had a faster get off than me. So just being around Trent for so long, I understood that if maybe 70% of the time, Trent is going to beat me off the ball. Mm-hmm. So that means he's going to scare the quarterback off the spot before I get there, just because he was just an exceptional defensive tackle that had freakish ability. Yeah. So Trent used to force a lot of sacks my way. Now, if I didn't know that about Trent or didn't care, how he rushed, and I'm just going to get mine, and I try to beat him getting off the ball, well, we may be too fast and don't create a cage and give the quarterback a lane because we got two guys just going too fast. So it's just understanding the guys you're rushing with and understanding that if we all rush together, then we win. The defensive lines that you don't see, have a lot of sack numbers are usually selfish. It's usually a guy saying, I'm going to go get the sack and I'm going to try my best to go get the sack. And I don't care if I mess up if you get the sack, because at the end of the day, it's going to be 4-on-5, right? One guy is going to win his one-on-one blatantly. And then the other guys, you may lose your rep. Well, if I'm losing my rep, I'm not going to make sure my teammate can't finish his because I'm losing mine. So I like where this team is thinking. They're on the right track. And just the noise that's coming from spring is, these guys, they understand that they have to be better. They have accepted the challenge. They were good, but they have to be great. And they understand that no matter what Gunner does, no matter what Nate Frazier does, no matter what Coach Glenn, calls, best defenses have defensive lines that can close games. And there are going to be plenty of situations where everybody has done their part. And it's going to come down to a 2-minute at the end of the game where your 4 guys got to rush together and go close the game out. So I love what's coming out of spring ball.
So you used the word selfish. I think that's really interesting because this also touches on something that Quintavious said. And look, here's the thing, and Davin, you know this. Most of the audience is like me. We don't know what it feels like to be a big-time college athlete, but we did grow up playing sports. I played in high school. And any athletic endeavor, here's what I've learned in life, Davin. People are just selfish. You can go play in a church league basketball game, and there are guys that will not pass the basketball. I mean, church league pickup just for fun. There are guys that will not share the rock, even in a situation like that. So when you've got a guy like Quintavious Johnson talking about Amaris Williams, Davin, that's a guy that's going to come in here. It's going to compete for playing time, some of the pats on the back, the glory, the stats. Amaris is going to, theoretically take some of the stuff that Quintavious could get for himself. And yet Quintavious is in a press conference yesterday saying, hey, Amaris Williams, I'm the one that got him to come here. I'm the one that convinced him to come here. That's a recruiting win for me. And I don't think that people should take that level of selflessness, that willingness to share glory and share playing time. I don't think that people should take that for granted because I never played big-time college sports, didn't come close to it. But I've played a lot of other sports, and and listen, I'm probably selfish too, but players that I grew up playing with, pretty selfish, generally speaking. But a lot of these Georgia players are just made differently on that, and I do think we should appreciate that.
The hardest part about a team sport is trying to defeat the human nature. Mm-hmm. And human nature is being, comfortable. And what is being, comfortable? That is doing what you want to do when you feel like doing it. So majority of people are selfish just based off, human nature. And I said this last week. When Coach Smart got there, he watched the defense before he was there of the old tape. And he said, I see 11 guys trying to go make a play, not 11 guys playing for each other. So just since 2000 and when did he get there? 15, 14, he's been instilling this selfless culture. Even I can just hear it in my head, and it drives me the same way it drove me then. It drives me today of people love being around winners. And if you just don't focus on how can I win, how can we win, then when we do win, everybody reaps the rewards. And also you have to look in the mirror, right? So these guys are special just simply because I remember being at Georgia and having 2 sacks in the first 4 weeks, and I see all this media, and it's like, can the dogs get out to the quarterback? And you start pressing a little bit. So just the fact that these guys have this mindset of, Quinn Johnson had 2 sacks last year. And for him to go out and say, okay, let's go get the best defensive end in the portal to come help, that just speaks so much about the team culture, especially in the land of paying players to play. I think this is what sets Georgia apart, is we still have those core values of a team. And like I said before, the hardest thing to defeat inside a culture is human nature. And Coach Smart has done a great job of that. And you see that through the players.
Let me finish with this. We didn't have time to play this clip today, but Quintavious was also talking about basically doing battle at practice with a guy like Ja Jackson. Ja's this 6'10" offensive lineman. People are fascinated by him. It sounds like he's had a pretty good spring thus far, kind of gotten a little bit of buzz. But my point is, as a guy who did this during your own Georgia career, and I'm guessing it's guys like Andrew Thomas and Isaiah Wynn, other guys that you're just, doing battle with. What do you learn about your teammate in a situation like that? Because Quintavious was good enough yesterday to say, okay, I've seen this from this guy and that from that guy. Really pretty good and willing to just describe some of what he's experiencing from other Georgia players during practice. When you're in a fight against another, stellar athlete on the other side of the ball, what do you learn about a guy in a situation like that? Because for fans, that's always some of the most interesting stuff of, oh, yeah, I used to compete against so-and-so every day. And how much do you gain insight on your teammate when you're actually battling him like that?
You know what, man? Scratch the teammate. When you go to Georgia and you know that that guy who you're going against is a 5-star guy or a guy that everybody just wanted, you understand that whoever I play on Saturday is probably not going to be up, to his level. Isaiah Wynn used to give me so much of a hard time during, practice that when it got to Saturday, I knew that the guy I was playing against got nothing on Isaiah Wynn. So it's just that when you coming from a school like Georgia, you've seen the best of the best. And even when that goes from the offensive line, I remember Thomas' first year, and he was just like, man, I go against you, I go against Zoe, I go against Trent, Ledbetter. By the time, Saturday comes, I've seen it all. So just going to a school like Georgia, knowing that you're practicing against the best of the best, it builds this just confidence that whoever I play Saturday, one, they wasn't good enough to come here, or, I know for a fact that the guys that we have here are just better because that guy has gone through the same camp that I've been through, the same, conditioning that I've been through. So he's a warrior just like me. So when I played Tennessee, they probably didn't have Bloody Tuesday. But I'm going against this guard and this left tackle that did every Bloody Tuesday, and he did not quit. He's wired just like me, and he's going to die on his sword. Saturday, they probably won't do that. And that's why you're just able to see teams Georgia just railroad teams during the fourth quarter is because they're used to taking each other to the deep end during the week. And a lot of teams don't even practice that way. So when it happens in the game, both sides of the ball are like, look, we do this against 5-stars every day for months at a time. The game is the easiest part. So it just builds a lot of confidence, for the weekend.
I'll let you go after this, I promise, but it's hard when it's hot too, right? August, September. Yeah. These are like probably friends, but in a situation like that, because I've been to a lot of NFL practice, training camp, things like that, because they let media see more of the stuff. Guys getting fights all the time. It's like when it's hot, even if it's a guy you normally like, when he's out there pushing and banging on you, like that turns into something pretty quick, right?
No, yeah, it was Coach Smart first year, our first camp, and we used to go to the Polar, Polar Panels field where they had no shade and the indoor was being built.
Yeah.
So it was just hot. Even though it was camp, the solar panels just added so much more heat. And me and Isaiah Wynn were like this.
Mm-hmm.
And this was the first practice where, Coach Smart was like, when my running back is 20 yards downfield, I want my O-lineman down there running down, trying to finish on the pal. And this is when he first kind of tried to introduce this. So I think Chubb breaks for like a 15-yard run. I run down, the defense is trying to swarm Chubb and, strip the ball. And Isaiah Wynn runs 20 yards downfield and just obliterates me, takes me off my feet. I'm not, looking for it. And I get up, and I remember just punching him in his thing and end up messing up my hand, and I couldn't, practice. But we were best friends. But that just speaks
so
about
funny.
the heat, the camp, and the competition. The competition of, iron, sharpening, iron. And
Sure.
at that time, Isaiah Wynn did not care that we were friends, did not care that we was teammates. Coach Smart said he want his O-line to be nasty. So he came, he took my head off. And you see that 8-9 years later. So, like I say, iron definitely sharpens iron.
It's a great story, Davin. I appreciate that. So much good stuff. Davin, remind folks, whether it be team meeting, the other stuff you're doing online, how they can find more of your social media content.
One Love Media on YouTube, Team 7 Meeting on my IG, and Davin Bellamy 17 on Twitter. And always, Brandon, man, I really appreciate you.
Go Dogs, Davin. Appreciate your time.
Go Dogs, man.
Good stuff there from Davin Bellamy. Love those stories, and it is so funny. It's like he says, Isaiah and him, great friends, but in the heat of the moment, I do mean the heat, boy, you see tempers come out. And it's not a good idea to punch guys when they're wearing a helmet. Nothing good comes from that. But in a previous media life, going to a lot of these NFL training camps where you just see more of that kind of thing, guys get in a fight just like that, just because it's just hot and people are in a bad mood when it's really, really hot. Fun stuff. Golden Shoe today, one of our favorite guys, James David Carter, terrific musician in the Athens area. He shares this. Have you seen the video? It's been passed around a little bit, and people just do weird stuff on the internet now. So this guy is eating a banana out of the peel with a spoon. It's the silliest thing you'll ever see in your life. And so somebody writes and says, who eats a banana like that? And so James says, a Florida Gator fan does, and tags me, and you better believe that's the case. We like making fun of those lousy, stinking Gators, so we'll give James David Carter his golden shoe for that, and anybody who's out there making fun of Florida, we love all of that. And speaking of making fun of them, let's laugh as the next couple of days, all these Florida fans who are like, maybe I don't want Todd Golden anymore after he lost in the second round of the NCAA tournament. If he really does become a candidate for the North Carolina job, we'll see them squirm over that a bit. We'll also remind them it's been 1,964 days since Florida has beaten Georgia. We like to call that our Gator Hater Updater. We give it to you each and every day, and we've been doing it for all these days in a row. What a great tradition that is for our program, because we believe a good Georgia fan is a Gator hater first and foremost. Y'all have a great day. We're back tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, poured by Dr. Pepper. We'll look forward to talking to you then. And on video. Time now for the R.S. Andrews Cooldown. R.S. Andrews, when you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs, showing up on time, doing the work that's promised for the price that's promised. Okay, so clearly I've had some voice issues during the show. I'm really discouraged by that because things have been great. I really don't know what it is. I mean, obviously I have, a voice problem. We know that going back to the fall, but I've not had any issues in a while. I don't typically have allergies and pollen. I don't know if that's related to this. My son does play baseball about every day. I don't know if it's infield dirt that's just getting in here, or if I don't know if it's just wearing down from overuse. I really don't know, but I'm pretty disappointed to be dealing with that here today. So we'll do a few comments. We'll get ready to bounce out of here after that. Wyatt Fielden says, were you ever a fan of someone else, or were you always a diehard Braves fan? So when I was a kid, and if you're younger than me, this won't make as much sense to you, but if you're about my age, you'll remember this. So on our cable, we had WGN, and for whatever reason, I think I was like, back then, a TV station coming from Chicago was like a really big deal. To me, it was. Now, all media is, for the most part, interconnected, intertwined, and frankly, even going to Chicago doesn't really feel like that foreign of a place anymore. There's a certain sameness to cities, which I think we need to address at a certain point. But the unique characteristics that cities used to have, I think some of that's going away. I have noticed that as I've traveled. But the point is, back then, it was fascinating to me that we had TV coming from another place. And so watch the Cubs all the time. They mostly only played day games back then, as many of you know. And so every day I watched the Cubs on TV, the same way that people all across America became Braves fans because of WTBS, which was the superstation. WGN was also a superstation, and I watched the Cubs every day. I knew every player in the Cubs roster. And so I didn't have Cubs gear, but I watched the Cubs every day and liked them and hoped they win games. And a lot of people had some affinity for the Cubs because of this. I watched the Cubs all the time. The version where like Andre Dawson wins the MVP in 87, Sean Dunston playing shortstop, Ryan Sandberg obviously at second, Vance Law at third, Mark Grace, finishing second in the Rookie of the Year in 1988. Damon Berryhill. That's funny. I know all the starters from like back in the 80s where I couldn't even hardly name, half the guys in Major League Baseball right now. It's just what happens as you get older. But the closest I ever came to cheering for a different team was I used to watch the Cubs every day and developed a little bit of an affinity. It's funny. I don't even watch the Braves that frequently now because I'm just busy. We all are. I still follow the Braves every day. Listen to a lot on the radio. But back then, I just didn't have anything to do. I wasn't – my social calendar wasn't all that full. I just watched Cubs every day. Good question. Let's see what else. Some of you are arguing, which if that's what you want to do, you can do that. But it makes it harder for me to find things to read. Foster Moss says WGN, UPN, TBS, those were the days. We also for a while had WOR. And you know how like brothers can be a little bit different. So I gravitated towards the Cubs on WGN. My brother gravitated towards the Mets on WOR. For whatever reason, WOR did not last on our cable quite as long. That was gone. But, my brother would think of himself as more of a Mets fan. I thought of myself as more of a Cubs fan. And I think that some people, we didn't have this, but I want to say maybe this was a Western thing. Was KTLA also a superstation and that people had that on their cable? We didn't have KTLA, but I think some people might have, which would have had Dodgers games back then. Let's see what else. Yeah, I can't quite tell what they're talking about on YouTube right now. So let me come back. Let me come back to that in a moment. Let me get some Facebook comments for right now. And then we'll get more into that other stuff here in just a little bit.
Very wholesome discussion about baseball in the 80s. While tonight, Thing is going to help out the first pitch, apparently. Netflix opener.
Wait, though, the musician Sting?
No, Thing, the hand from Wednesday, the Addams Family.
Wait, are you serious? From like the 1950s?
Wednesday is a popular show on Netflix.
Oh.
The Addams Family.
Okay.
So Thing, the same character, will help apparently assist in throwing out the first pitch or give a hand, as they say.
So the game's on Netflix, correct?
Yeah, tonight's game's on Netflix. That's correct.
So, okay, I guess that's fine. This is like the thing that Fox has done for a long time, where it's like we're going to jam all of our, shoulder programming into this sports broadcast. So Fox has done this forever. So I guess Netflix doing its version of that is maybe not all that surprising. I'm trying to think. I don't know that I have watched any of the NFL broadcasts that have been on Netflix. I don't know that I've done that.
You mean you had better things to do on Christmas Day afternoon?
I think that's probably the case. Yeah. Yes.
This past year the games were terrible, so that didn't help. But they were acceptable NFL broadcasts. But they did start to drift this past year into they were like doing Zoom interviews with guys who weren't really involved in the game. Like Emmitt Smith was on, and it was sort of not all that compelling.
Their broadcast team was like 100 people deep, right? Which is pretty strange.
And then Barry Bonds is on the broadcast tonight. He's going to be part of the broadcast.
Okay. I will probably try to watch some of this. Although it's weird, I haven't watched as much Raw since Raw's been on Netflix. I don't know why that is. Because I have Netflix, but I don't think of Netflix as being the place to go for wrestling, and so therefore I end up not watching quite as much of it.
Netflix will also be the place to go for the Home Run Derby later this year.
Okay, well, there you go. Now, we do typically watch the Home Run Derby in our house, although I can't stand the format. How do you ruin – there's nothing cooler than home runs. Like, how do you ruin the Home Run Derby? So that's funny. But thank you for that insight. I am excited about having Major League Baseball back. I am. Looking forward to it. I'm not excited about the Braves, but I am excited about the sport in general. Let's see what else. Jim Blair says the police say that heat makes people hotter and more prone to violence. Yeah, I mean, I think that's 100% true. Now, fighting on the football field is obviously mostly just in fun. No one's really the only person getting hurt in that is, like Davin said, your fist from punching somebody in the helmet, which is not a smart thing to do. But it is true that huge share of the crime takes place in summertime. It just does. Huge portion of the crime takes place in summertime. Yeah, Matthew Deals talking about one of the heroes of the World Baseball Classic getting re-upped here. It's amazing how many of those guys are going to be now, I think, watched more closely. But listen, it is really hard to create a sporting event that becomes a thing that people care about. But the World Baseball Classic, I think, has really arrived. I mean, this seems to really matter to people. And it's not easy to create that, but I believe they have done so. A couple more comments. While we're in the midst of just sort of naming names, Jim Blair's naming some old school Big Red Machine names. That's a little before my time, but I do know all those guys. All right, let's see what else. A couple more, then we're going to go. Jeremy Harbin says, I was born in Georgia. I cheer for the home teams, but I am a North Carolina basketball fan. There are a lot of people. I mean, people don't realize that this North Carolina coaching opening is going to be a big deal. It's really interesting, and I wish we had more time to talk about this sort of thing because I am fascinated by this. So the ACC used to be a huge deal in basketball, as many of you know. And for the most part, that's just not really true anymore. The teams aren't quite as good. The interest in the league is not what it once was. And I don't know, maybe the reason I'm interested in this is because it feels like a potential caution for the SEC that the ACC eventually got to be so big and so far-flung from its original mission, which was mostly the Mid-Atlantic states, that now it doesn't really mean anything anymore. And for the most part, ACC basketball doesn't have the cachet it once had. But the two big brands, Duke and North Carolina, I would argue they're just as big as ever. North Carolina is not quite as good as they used to be, but from a fan standpoint, big as ever. This North Carolina basketball coaching search is going to be a very big deal. It's going to be a very big deal because, as Jeremy said, I've always been kind of a North Carolina basketball fan. There are a lot of people that have that casual relationship with North Carolina. And, I can tell you when I was a kid, there was North Carolina gear everywhere. You probably see a little less of it now, but I think the actual below the surface, it's still really, really popular. Among the biggest apparel sellers every year. There's always been the reason why if the SEC could expand with two new teams, I do believe that North Carolina is probably the number one wish. I really do. I think that Virginia is probably number two. A little bit different than what some people might think. But yeah, UNC, very, very big following. Gary Roach says, I've always heard that lemons help clear your voice. Yeah, a lot of those like homespun remedies, I've tried a lot of them, haven't really worked. And I'm trying to think back, I'm sorry for doing this out loud on the show because really all you really want is me to just deliver the content. You don't really care. But when it was at my absolute worst back in the fall, I'm trying to think if that coincided with also being at baseball every day. I don't know. Is there something going on with that? I really don't know. I don't know. Jonathan Aaron says, are you a Coach Williams guy or a Coach K guy? If forced to choose, I will take Roy Williams over Coach K. If forced to choose. Anything else? All right, we're going to leave it there for today. Jeremy Smith says, I miss old baseball, BA. Some of these new rules just aren't baseball. Yeah, I don't like a lot of the new rules. I really don't. I don't think that the pitch clock rules and things like that, I really don't think it's helped anything. I don't know that baseball necessarily need helping, really. And the way a lot of this stuff is enforced in college is so silly. With the guys won't make eye contact with the pitcher. Some of that's just so silly. It just seems like there are certain sports that are always desperate to get people to like the sport that are never going to, and they end up not really serving the folks that do like them as well as they possibly could. I think baseball's sometimes guilty of that. Henry Dion encourages folks to give us a like. I appreciate that, Henry. We're not always as good at that kind of thing as we should, but I do appreciate you encouraging folks to do that. Thank you. Thank you very much. All right, we're going to leave it there for today. We got Before the Hedges tonight. Good stuff with them continuing to look at all the maneuverings in the 2027 class for Georgia. That's Jeff Sentell, Kaylee Manziel. Also, make sure you check out R.S. Andrews online at rsandrews.com for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time, doing the work that's promised for the prices promised. You can trust them on that today, including as spring starts to get here and really stay here. Get your air conditioning unit tuned back up to factory fresh specs. Trust R.S. Andrews on all of that. Hope you have a great day. Find out more online at rsandrews.com. Get new life out of your old AC unit. Eventually, you're going to have to replace it, but y'all, if I can save you some money, I want to. Our friends at R.S. Andrews have really built their business around just squeezing out a little more life out of these old units that, it could collapse on you if you're not careful. Stop working on you. Get the peace of mind you need that your unit can make it through the summer that we have on the way. rsandrews.com for more on that. Have a great day, everybody. We'll see if we can clean up the voice here a little bit and come back and do it again tomorrow. Try better. See you then. DawgNation Daily, poured by Dr. Pepper. We'll look forward to talking to them.